Hey guys, it's Kayla with Painted by Kayla Payne. I'm back again today with another furniture before and after transformation. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I've taken this whitewashed 1990s style paint finish and painted it into this beautiful high gloss green show-stopping piece of furniture. So with all of the furniture that I redo, the first thing is always to remove the hardware and give everything a good cleaning. And as you can see here at this piece, it's got a lot of really heavy, deep grain, and I'm wanting a smooth and perfect finish. So I'm going to begin by grain filling. I'm going to water down this Timbermate wood filler just a little bit to get to more of a brushable consistency. I'm going to brush this grain filler all over the entire surface of the cabinet. I filled in the routed groove along the top and on the two front doors of this piece. Just wasn't a fan of the look of that. I wanted something more seamless and perfect. I also took this chance to fill in the old hardware holes. After the wood filler had completely dried, I used 220 grit to sand it back. And this is where I wish I would have used a darker wood filler, because once this wood filler dried, it dried to the same color as the original finish, and it made it really hard to see on camera exactly what's going on. But here you can see those lighter spots inside the grain. That's where the wood filler was left. So I sanded it all back so that I could only see that wood filler inside that grain. Then I cleaned up all of the dust and moved on to my second step, which is using this Fine Paints of Europe brushing putty, which is basically like a really, really thick oil-based primer. I added just a splash of mineral spirits to it, that way it could make it, easier to brush, and then I brushed the entire chest with brushing putty. This will further fill in any more grain. It's a much finer consistency than a wood filler is, so it's going to do a good job in settling into the grain and flattening out my surface so that I can have a perfectly smooth and flat finish in the end. After my brushing putty had ample time to dry, I used 220 grit to start sanding it back again. Brushing putty leaves a lot of deep brush marks, but don't freak out or anything, it's supposed to do that. Also, your sandpaper when sanding brushing putty should look like the one on the left. If it looks like the one on the right, that means your brushing putty has not dried enough. Give it some more time until it sands to powder. And here's what my door is looking like after sanding that brushing putty. It's not completely flat yet, but it's getting there. So I'm going to clean up all this dust. And then I'm going to move on to masking my openings so that I can keep the openings all nice and clean before I spray my primer. Alright, let's get ready to spray some primer. Here I'm putting together my Devil Biss Finish Line 4 gun. So I don't use this gun anymore, but I have used it for many, many years. And if you are looking for a good starter gun, if you are a beginner or maybe even a beginner intermediate and you're looking for a good primer gun or a gun to shoot heavy bodied materials, this is a good option. Check out the description below. I've got a link to it if you are interested in checking it out. But anyway, I'm going to mix up my Fine Paints of Europe oil undercoater. And I'm mixing in my mineral spirits to thin it down a bit. I'm also a huge fan of these disposable cup and liners. Everything is linked in the description, so be sure to check that out. I'm using a fairly large fluid cap size here. It's a 2.2 millimeter, so I'm doing the best I can to only overlap my passes about 50%. So that I don't get too heavy because I don't want drips and sags. I gave my primer 24 hours to dry before I used this 400 grit sandpaper and a hard sanding block to sand back my primer flat. And then I used this spot and glazing putty. This particular one, it was made by 3M, and I'll be honest, I did not like it. I'm a much bigger fan of Bondo spot and glazing putty, so I've linked the Bondo below. I did not like this gray product at all. But here I'm using 320 grit sandpaper to sand out back my spot and glazing putty and to sand that first coat of primer. I'm trying to get all of the orange peel sanded out. I want a nice flat sanded surface. After my first coat of primer was completely sanded flat and looking good and cleaned up, I primed it a second time. I followed the same exact process and procedure, sprayed that second coat of primer on it, filled any more imperfections, sanded it flat again, and now I'm ready to move on to building a paint booth so that I can get some paint on. So I'm going to be the first to admit that this paint booth is by far not the best case scenario, and it is not perfect. But it is better than nothing. When using a slow drying, high gloss oil enamel like Fine Paints of Europe, this is going to offer you better protection versus just painting out in the open air. I'm going to do the best I can with what I have to work with to limit the amount of dust in the air so that it doesn't land in my shiny paint finish as it's drying. So I've stapled this 3mm plastic to the ceiling, and then I've put a zippered enclosure in, and I've taped up all of my seams. And then I like to throw about anywhere from 15 to 20 gallons of water onto the floor. So my floor is completely puddled, and this is going to help keep the dust down. Again, this is not a perfect scenario, but I can assure you it's better than nothing. For this piece, I chose Fine Paints of Europe Hollandlac Brilliant in the shade Bottle Green. It is the most perfect shade of Kelly green, or I guess John Deere green, depending on where you're from, that I've ever seen. I love it so much. It's also been a really good seller for me, so in the event that you are a furniture painter and you're tired of painting whites and grays and blacks and blues or whatever, take a chance and go for a bright Kelly green like this. It's done really well for me. Here I'm using the same Devil Biss Finish Line 4 gun that I showed whenever I was doing the primer. And again, I'll say, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this is the best gun for this exact paint application, because it is not. However, if you are a beginner and you're looking into getting a gun that will spray multiple different types of coatings, water-based finishes, solvent-based finishes, this is a good beginner gun. So it can get you to where you need to go until you are more familiar with the coatings, until you have outgrown this gun. This is a decent gun at a good price point to start with. And of course, the gun is just one part of this equation. You're going to need a good air supply, an air compressor to run this particular gun. And I don't have time to get into all of that right now, but as for a little tip, you're going to want to buy an air compressor with as much CFM as you can afford. So higher the CFM, the more the air compressor costs, but I can get into that later, but that's just a little tip for you to take away for right now. After letting that first coat of paint dry for 24 to 48 hours, I removed the piece of furniture from the booth and sanded the whole thing down using a high grit sandpaper. I also removed the old masking that had been painted and had dust hiding in all of the nooks and crannies. I put new masking paper in it, vacuumed and wiped down the entire thing, and then I loaded it back into the booth for its second coat. You'll notice here that I'm using a different gun. I actually upgraded guns in the middle of this project, which does not give me like the greatest video cohesion, but it is what it is. This is a Devil Biss Techna Pro Light. It is a step up in gun. It's also a step up in price, but it is a much better gun. However, since it is so much more expensive, I don't know that I could just in good conscience like recommend that you go out and jump in with both feet with this gun if you're new, unless your budget and skill level can afford it. After letting that second and final coat of paint dry for a couple of days, I brought everything out and started reassembling. This solid brass hardware is from Modern Matter. Again, I've got everything linked in the description, so check that out. If you're looking for some statement, luxurious hardware for your high gloss furniture, do not miss Modern Matter. They've got some of the most beautiful pieces I have ever seen. As a reminder, here's the before, and here's the after. I hope you enjoyed today's transformation. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.